Salut ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the review of The Sea I'm Diving In by Neun Welten. Neun Welten started out as a little folk combo in the early 2000s and managed to get my attention with their first full release, a 2006 released album called Vergessene Pfade. The very light-hearted, catchy, varied and just overall good mood kind of folk music they made just drew me in pretty fast, and 2009 they released their second album, and then things became a bit quiet around them. The band lost two of its members in 2010 and since then basically went completely radio silent. Here and there an occasional Facebook post would show up, but no new material surfaced for basically 7 years. Judging by this album, a lot has changed since their last release, which I guess is to be expected all things considered. Instead of the aforementioned rather upbeat and mostly instrumental folk, Neun Welten present themselves now with lyrics sung in English and have shifted their music style completely. Now, I waited for this album for many years to finally come out, and I want you to know this so you understand where I'm coming from with what I'm about to say about this album. Because I tried to shove my inevitable bias from the older albums aside as good as I can, but naturally I was always drawing parallels between this album and their prior works, simply because they are so different and, well, as I said before, I really liked their first two albums. The Sea I'm Diving In is basically gloom and melancholy all throughout. The intro starts you off with some ambient noises and dragged out, carefully pulled e-guitar strings, and ending with a little bit of an acoustic guitar. Basically, the intro is already foreshadowing what the album will ultimately present you with, but the first real track, called Drowning, puts almost all the cards on the table. What you get on this album are compositions that use all the instruments very carefully, very held back right down to the vocals. Be it the electric guitar, the acoustic one, the drums or the violin, whatever. And I just have to give them credit here. Neun Welten never once stooped down to use the quote-unquote sad crying cat violin to convey the melancholy of their album. In fact, I would say that the use of the violin on this album is overall pretty clever, because it's almost always present and is this sort of grey eminence in the background that is always used to amplify the atmosphere. However, atmosphere is also the biggest downside of this album for me. It's an album of the one emotion type. It manages to hit this one sort of tone, this one emotion, but really not much else. Throughout all of the album you have this slightly melancholic atmosphere going on. This atmosphere that never escalates beyond the borders that are set within the first track. Even when Neun Welten put in a slight crescendo where everything comes together, and those moments which are the most beautiful on all of the album, in my opinion, the compositions never become any more powerful than they were before, because both vocals and instruments sound so held back, almost tentative. You would imagine at some point they would just let it all out at least once for any one of the songs, but really none of them have that. None of them have these really powerful moments with some oomph behind them. And I really missed those moments because they would have been emotional high points on this album. And for some reason, the vocals also often have this slight echoing effect laid over them. Not a really strong one, but enough for you to notice. Why? I have absolutely no idea. I didn't really found it adding anything to the songs themselves. Most of the vocals are almost stoically recited to the listener, and this echoing really doesn't add any emotions here or really anything at all. And while the mix overall sounds really good, here and there the vocals could have been put a little bit more in the front of things, because there are very few moments where the instruments just overshadow them. Overall though, the mix is completely fine and nothing to complain about. And it's not like this album doesn't have its moments where you can see something more powerful or interesting shine through the cracks. The opening of the song Floating Minds reminded me a lot of a German band called Nachtreich, with how some harshly played cellos just drive the melody in the beginning. But after half a minute or so it falls back into the typical structures for this album. The Dying Swan starts you off with strings that sound almost threatening, like that short audio cue you get in movies when something bad is about to happen, along with some scratching noises blending in perfectly. But again, after 50 seconds, the whole composition just tilts over and falls back into the usual, somewhat melancholic mood that is present on the rest of the album. There are interesting moments on this album, but often they aren't fully explored, and what remains are ideas that left me wondering what could have been. And why the last song on this album sounds like a new wave track for 3.5 minutes is another riddle to me. The change certainly was welcome, but just as this album feels odd in comparison to Neun Welten's prior works, this one track feels odd in comparison to the rest of the album. In the end, many of the tracks just fused together to just one giant mass to me, because there's little difference between the stoic vocals and the carefully played guitar, violin, drum combo of the song Cursed, and the stoic vocals with carefully played guitar, violin, drum combo in Nocturnal Rhymes. It's not that what Neun Welten present is necessarily bad, but ultimately, for me personally, it was just lacking in variety. So, as a conclusion, I was looking forward to this release for years and I really wanted to love it, but I can't. And because of that, it really felt like a challenge to review this because I was always drawing parallels to the prior works, which, as I said before, really liked. I personally am thoroughly underwhelmed with this album, but to be fair, being the longtime fan I am, I also had probably completely different expectations than you might have. This album could have been released under a different band name and probably nobody would have noticed, because, well, this really doesn't sound like Neun Welten at all anymore. The departure is too sudden and too rash, and the end result is not necessarily bad, but quite repetitive, with interesting ideas sprinkled in here and there, but the interesting ideas ultimately don't go anywhere. If you want an album that is very calm, very tranquil and slow, something that is just slightly melancholic but doesn't hit the depression button with its fist, the sea I'm diving in might be a good choice for you because that is exactly what it delivers and it delivers it pretty competently. But I will prefer the first two albums over this any day of the week. And since Neun Welten are under the label Prophecy, which upload all their artists' albums completely for free to stream, I will also put some links in the description for you so you can check out their whole discography before you maybe pony up the cash. So, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please leave a like or just subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. I will post at least one review per week, more content whenever I can manage to do it. You can also follow me on Facebook and or Twitter, links are in description, and also in the description you will find shopping links for this album and any relevant music videos or album streams if there are any. And if you have listened to this album, please let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, I hope to see you again next time, have a nice day, Salida!